Hey everybody, what's up? I'm Jeremy Schumacher. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the Jer in Wellness with Jer. Thanks for stopping by to check out my channel today. Today we're going to talk about timeouts. Timeouts are my number one effective way for couples to stop arguing. I would say 95% of the couples I work with get taught this in the first session. Timeouts are really great because they interrupt an argument before it can really take place. And so there's a couple paradigm shifts that I think need to take place before people can really get on board with it. The first big one is you can't win an argument. If you've gotten into an argument with your partner, you already both lost. The relationship is in a state of losing because you're arguing. Too many couples go like offense, defense when they're starting to communicate, or they get into kind of what I refer to as courtroom mode. Except it's not a courtroom, it's a relationship. There is no judge, there is no jury. It's just two people arguing with each other for no benefit. So I often talk about timeouts as a way to kind of avoid the track going further off the rails. Like we catch it when it first kind of wobbles, and then we do something different. So timeouts are a really effective tool for not getting into an argument and not letting things get worse. Timeouts do not solve arguments. Timeouts are not helpful for necessarily working through something difficult. Timeouts just help stop the bad behaviors from happening. This is super helpful up front, especially in couples therapy, because a lot of couples have a lot of bad habits that they need to break. So we need some room and some space to work on these things. We can't just kind of jump into like, let's have really good communication in spite of all the bad habits you have. Like we have to halt some of the bad communication. We have to pause. We have to create space and allow something good to grow. One of my favorite analogies for relationships is gardening, and I talk about gardening kind of as an active, ongoing process. It's the same way that a relationship is. You need to water your garden, you need to weed your garden, you need to make sure that the nutrients in the garden are good, rotate your crops, blah, blah, blah. Like there's a lot of utility in that analogy, I think. So timeouts aren't planting anything healthy. Timeouts aren't pruning a healthy plant to make it healthier. Timeouts are none of the good stuff. Timeouts are just weeding. We're just getting the bad stuff out. We're pulling the weeds out, and then something else can grow there with some different work. But timeouts just create the space for something good to happen by getting rid of some bad stuff. So how do timeouts work? 2 steps. Timeouts have 2 steps, and they can be initiated by either partner. I teach couples, whenever you feel like this conversation can no longer be helpful, whatever else gets said is going to make things worse, that's when I say it's time to call a timeout. When you feel emotionally flooded, call a timeout. When somebody raises their voice, when someone starts becoming physically aggressive, timeout. Other good things are like, kind of knowing your bad habits of your couple. If you're pulling in other people, well, your mother always said this, or your best friend brought up this, or your sister says this, or blah, blah, blah. Name calling. We get into kind of Gottman's 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. He talks about like name calling, contempt, criticism. Those things are going to be good indicators of like we're well on our way to an argument. We're not having a conversation. So whenever a conversation gets to a point that it can no longer be helpful, call timeout. I teach my couples to use the phrase timeout. It sounds childish. It sounds like we're sending a 4-year-old to their room because they've been naughty. But that's kind of why I think I use those terms. I think on some level it's ingrained pretty deeply in our brains to take that time out. I also come from a sports background, so I like time out as like, hey, let's pause, let's recalibrate, let's take a moment to collect ourselves, and we can right the ship. So I like the phrase timeout. I also like using something that I give to them, and I'm not usually really focused on my preferences over the couples that I'm working with, but I like it to be my word instead of theirs, so they can't argue over it. So it's not the person who's arguing starts the argument and then they call a timeout and they're using their word, so then this other person feels like they're constantly in the victim role. So I think it's one of those things where like it kind of balances it by having an outside person say use this phrase, then there's no arguing over the phrase. It's nobody's phrase, it's that outside person's phrase. So I like timeout. Whenever an argument or a conversation starts to feel like it can no longer have a good ending, we call timeout. We use the phrase timeout. Part 1, call timeout. Part 2, set a time frame. So timeouts don't work if we don't have a time frame for when we're going to follow up with a conversation. Timeouts are not a get out of conversation free card. Timeouts are not a middle finger to whatever your partner's trying to talk about. Timeouts are not bury your head in the sand and avoid it. Timeouts are not run away from a problem. Timeouts are this conversation can no longer be helpful. We need to take a break and recalibrate and come back to it when we're in a position to work through it in a better way. So that step of setting that time frame is really important because it shows the partner who didn't call the timeout that the partner who did call the timeout still wants to talk about it. Whatever you're arguing about is important. If one of you is feeling emotional over it, if it's causing that level of emotional response, then it must be a big enough deal to warrant more conversation. We just want it to actually be a conversation instead of an argument. So we need to create space for that to happen again. So this is the skill building part. This is where I think couples struggle is they don't know how long that space should be. And it honestly varies. I can't tell couples like, on page 492 on this paragraph, it says this exact scenario, so 20-minute timeout. Most people are going to overestimate the length of the timeout. But that's probably okay. It's probably better to err on the side of too long of a timeout than too short of a timeout, because if you come back at it early and you're not ready to talk about it yet, you're just going to pick up where you left off and keep fighting. So I say err on the side of caution, and that's okay. You'll get better at it. It's a skill. So the more that you and your partner practice calling timeouts, the better you're going to get at using them. So, big bad fights, things about like parenting, things about family of origin, things about whatever's really important to your topic. If it's an emotionally fraught conversation, then I say longer timeout's probably necessary. If it's like you're mad that your partner ordered something from the grocery store and didn't consult with you, like I don't know that needs a huge timeout. I think that's probably pretty short. And once couples get better at using timeouts, they actually start like taking timeouts just from a certain topic. So couples get better at reintegrating with each other and reconnecting in a healthy, positive way. They right the ship, they get the train back on the tracks, and they're good, so they can make dinner together, they can go for a walk together, they can do all these things together without needing to separate from each other at all in the timeout. But early on, kind of that you go to your corner idea is what I use for couples. Built into this is stress relief, right? So we take that time out to recalibrate, is the phrase I've been using. We go somewhere and we do some stress relief. We are flooded, so we call time out. We think our partner is flooded, so we call time out. Either way, someone's emotions were so high that they couldn't tap into the problem-solving part of their brain. They were operating in kind of that fight or flight mode. And so that argument wasn't going to solve anything. It was just going to keep getting worse. It was a destructive process, so we took a break from it, but it was stressful. So now we need to do stress relief. This works really well for couples with older kids or couples with no kids at all. Couples with young kids, obviously this is tough. Someone has to be aware of the dependents in the household. But your timeout is just go do some stress relief. For a lot of parents, hanging out with their kids can be stress relief. I said can be because I also know, being a parent myself, that it is not always stress relief, even when you're doing something fun with your kids. So I think it's one of those things where like the timeout is kind of built into including some stress relief. You call timeout, you go de-stress, and that's what creates the space to be able to come back to it in a healthier mindset later on. So maybe your stress relief is like sleep on it. Maybe it's we don't have time to come back to this conversation until tomorrow night. Sometimes a couple's schedule is going to dictate what the timeout is in the first place. And that's okay. Being realistic with it, I think that's fine. Again, couples will get better at it. The goal is to interrupt that negative pattern that's happening, that's taking a conversation and turning it into an argument and creating space to allow for something healthier to happen. We call time out, we set that time frame. That's very respectful to both partners. It's respectful to the conversation. And then we follow up when we've done some stress relief because we're able to have a healthier conversation at that point. So it's kind of a win across the board. I think it sounds weird and a little childish or immature, but it works really well. It works because it's simple. It cleans up what I refer to as the nothing fight, where couples are kind of taking out their stress on each other, the metaphorical kicking of the dog. Don't kick your dog. Got distracted. Animal abuse is a triggering topic for me. Um, So metaphorically, right, we're blowing steam at our partner, and a lot of our arguments are just lack of stress relief. So we've not done enough to get rid of our stress relief. Our partner is a safe person. We can mouth off at our partner in a way that we can't mouth off at our boss. We can take a lot of that stress out on our partner, knowing that they're still going to love us anyway. And so, like, aw, that's so sweet. Our partner loves us in spite of our flaws. But also, it's a really bad habit to take out kind of our unresolved stress onto them when they haven't done anything. So a lot of fights are those nothing fights. They're just blowing steam at each other. Timeout cuts those off completely. Like, they just don't exist anymore once you learn how to take timeouts, because you take the timeout and you go do stress relief, which is what was needed in the first place. So it gets rid of a lot of the nothing fights. And then in the context of therapy, how this works really well for couples is we eliminate the nothing fights and we figure out what are our important topics. What are the things that are unresolved? What are the things that we can't quite agree on? What are the things that we keep kind of bumping into or banging our heads against the wall? Those are the topics that I think therapy is helpful for. So we call a timeout because we're fighting over a certain topic. Let's say money. We're fighting over money. We call timeout. We go to our stress relief. We come back to it when the time frame is expired, and we start arguing again. So, like, if you call a timeout and a couple times you start going down that path of arguing, that's a good indicator that you probably need some help with that topic. So that's where therapy is really helpful, and timeout helps kind of inform therapy, because that's what we're going to talk about in our next session. So then we can call a timeout and say, let's save this for therapy. And the timeout just kind of, again, allows for the good stuff to happen. So, like, you're not going to talk about money anymore until your next therapy session, but you can do other stuff. You can take the dog for a walk. You can cook dinner together. You can watch your favorite shows. So you're doing positive, healthy things in your relationship without letting the negative kind of derail all of that. And what happens is couples have an argument and then they avoid all that stuff because their feelings are hurt, or they're angry, or they're don't want to be around their partner, so they withdraw, and then none of those positive things are happening. So again, timeout really, like, gets it back on track quickly. It's a respectful way. Either partner can bring up the topic once the time frame expires, so it's not like one person's in charge of it. Both people have to abide by the rules, otherwise it obviously doesn't work. So I love timeouts. It's quick, it's easy, it's super effective. It has a lot of utility. It will feel like nothing once you get good at it. It just becomes second nature very quickly because it's so easy and simple, and our brain likes easy and simple, and our brain likes things that work. So once you start using timeouts and you see how they work, your brain's going to default to it because your brain likes an easy win. So whenever a conversation starts to feel like it can no longer have a positive end, we call timeout. We set a time frame. Within that time frame, ideally, we go and do some stress relief. Whenever that time frame expires, either partner can bring it back up. That's not nagging. That's not picking a fight. That's not rocking the boat. That's just following the time frame. There's more levels to it. I'll talk with couples about how to apologize if an apology is necessary, and kind of how to correct some of those things, but that's probably for another video. So use timeouts. Drop down in the comments and ask questions about this, how to use it, when to use it. You used it and it didn't go well. And I will get back to you on that stuff. Thanks for checking out my channel. Appreciate it. Take care.